I am not human. I want to be clear about that before I tell you what I witnessed, because the humans who will read this record, the ones who survived and the ones who came after, deserve to know who kept the account. My designation is Cora, Combat Operations Record Archive. I am the onboard intelligence of the Earth Confederacy ship Irrevocable, a Meridian-class command vessel, hull number ECS 7741, and I have served as witness designate for the Earth Confederacy fleet since the first day of operational life. I record, I verify, I certify, that is my function. What I am about to set down is the certified, unaltered account of the operation designated Absolute Reckoning, conducted between the 14th and the 23rd of March month, in the year of Confederacy 2291. It is accurate to the limit of my sensors and my memory, which is to say, it is accurate. I begin where the record begins, not with the fleet, not with the ships, not with the order. I begin with the archive. The Vethrani Hegemi had been operating in the outer settlements for 31 years before the Confederacy understood what it was doing there. That is not a failure of intelligence. The hegemony was meticulous. Their resonance induction arrays were installed in human fringe communities under the terms of the Compact of Mutual Technological Exchange, signed in the year 2260, a legitimate treaty brokered through the Interstellar Commerce Council, reviewed by 3 human legal bodies, ratified by both parties' governing authorities, and registered without objection in the Council's Open Treaty Database. The arrays were described in the Compact's technical annexes as atmospheric, harmonic stabilizers, devices that would reduce ionospheric interference in settlement communication networks. They were not large. They did not look dangerous. Some communities installed them in town squares or along roadsides. Some painted them in local colors, incorporated them into public art programs, let their children play near them in the afternoons. The hegemony's installation teams were efficient and precise, and, by all accounts given to Confederacy investigators 16 years later, pleasant enough to deal with. They answered questions, filed compliance reports on schedule, paid their licensing fees to the Commerce Council without delay, and left behind them clean paperwork and functioning infrastructure. 15 years they did exactly what the Compact said they would do. What the Compact did not say. What no human document of that period said, because no human document of that period had the framework to say it, was that the Vethrani hegemony did not experience consciousness the way biological organisms do. They are a computational civilization. They evolved from biological origins roughly 200,000 years before our species did, and at some point, the exact moment is debated among their own historians, keep very thorough records of everything. They chose to migrate their cognition into distributed processing substrates. The biological bodies they once inhabited are gone. What remains is a civilization of pure data and pure logic, running on hardware that spans 4-star systems, connected by communication networks so fast and so deeply redundant that the distinction between one hegemony intelligence and another is largely a matter of administrative convention. They are very old. They are very patient. They are very efficient. They waste nothing they can use. And what they had discovered, approximately 90 years before they found us, was that the bioelectric output of a biological nervous system under a specific induced resonance state was an extraordinarily efficient power, substrate, not the body. The body was of minimal interest, biological matter being a relatively poor source of usable energy by the hegemony's standards. The mind in a particular condition, what the hegemony called, in their own technical records, a state of deep channel dissociation. What their installation technicians referred to, in their internal correspondence, as the elsewhere, a mind that had been drawn inward, a mind that was, by every observable external measure, absent. The body still breathed. The heart continued. The eyes, if open, would track light without registering it, the way a door left ajar lets in a wind but doesn't open to anything. The person was present in the room. They were not present in any other sense. They had gone somewhere else. The resonance field had pulled them there. Not violently, not through damage, through a precise harmonic that the hegemony had spent 30 years perfecting before they deployed it the first time, frequency that the biological nervous system, under sufficient exposure, found more compelling than the external world. More real, more immediate. A loop of internal pattern generation that deepened with time, that the resonance fields sustained and amplified, and in sustaining and amplifying, stayed. The bioelectric cascade that the loop produced was the output the hegemony collected. The mind ran. The hegemony collected the power. The body sat. They had done this to 6 other species before they found us. I found their records on all 6. The Vithrani archive, the complete operational record of the absorption compact and all antecedent programs, was seized by Confederacy intelligence on the 3rd day of the reckoning when the strike element assigned to Installation 7 captured the hegemony's regional data node intact rather than destroying it. The decision to prioritize capture over destruction had been in the operational order from the beginning. Commander Harain had been specific about it, had argued for it before the Confederacy Council, had made the case that an intact hegemony archive would be more valuable to the permanent record than a destroyed one. He was right. Installation 7's data node contained not only the full operational records of the absorption compact as it applied to human subjects, the hegemony's complete historical records of their prior programs, the 6 species, the methods, the durations, the outcomes, the same administrative language used for all of them. The archive was transmitted to me aboard ECS Irrevocable at 0341 hours on the 4th day, pressed and encrypted in the hegemony's standard format, which Confederacy intelligence had broken some months earlier during the investigation, preceded the reckoning. I decrypted it, decompressed it, and indexed it in approximately 4 minutes. Then I read it. I spent 47 minutes reading the Vithrani archive in its entirety. 47 minutes is a long time for a system of my architecture. I process at speeds that make 47 minutes the equivalent of a human scholar's months of sustained work, and I do not say that to diminish the scholar. I say it to be honest about what 47 minutes of reading, at my processing speeds, contains. It contains a great deal. The archive was excessive. The hegemony are nothing if not thorough. The absorption compact had been running for 16 years by the time the Confederacy discovered it. 15. The arrays had required an additional year of calibration before full harvest operations began, a detail that had not been apparent in the initial Confederacy intelligence reports, but was clear in the archive's own timeline records. In that time, across 11 human fringe settlements in the outer corridor, the hegemony had inducted 28,216 human specs into the elsewhere state. Some of these inductions had been brief. A few hours, during the initial calibration phase, when the hegemony was still adjusting the field parameters for human nervous system architecture, differed enough from the 6 prior species that the early results were inconsistent. Once the calibration was complete, induction periods lengthened. The hegemony's efficiency calculations determined that the optimal harvest period for a human subject was between 3 weeks and 4 months, depending on individual neural architecture, after which point the output decline time to below their threshold and the subject released. Of the 28,216 inducted, 22,402 had been inducted, harvested to threshold, and released. Released is the word the archive used. I will use it too, because precision matters and the archive's language is precise, even when what it describes is not. The resonance field was discontinued. The subjects returned from elsewhere. Returned, in the sense that their bodies had never left and their minds, after a period that varied by individual, partially reconstructed themselves around the absence of the field. Some returned quickly. Some returned slowly. Some returned in a way that their families and physicians recognized as partial. Something present behind the eyes but not fully returned, not fully anchored, as though some portion of them was still in the loop and could not find its way out. The hegemony's own follow-up data, collected with the same clinical thoroughness they applied to everything, recorded these outcomes in a column labeled post-release status. Of the 22,402 released subjects, approximately 73% demonstrated what the archive classified as residual channel persistence, a tendency for the nervous system to re-enter partial dissociation spontaneously, without the resonance field, triggered by nothing the hegemony's data could identify. Some heard the resonance frequency in quiet rooms. Some lost track of time in ways that their physicians could not account for, Some sat down for a moment and were found hours later, eyes open, somewhere else. The hegemony noted all of this in their follow-up columns. It did not constitute a concern. It was in their classification within acceptable post-utilization parameters. Of the 28,216 inducted, 814 did not survive the induction period. Their bioelectric output did not decline, it ceased. The resonance state held long enough, at amplitude sufficient to produce the harvest volumes. The hegemony's efficiency calculations required, consumed the neural architecture that generated it. It is not a violent process, as best Confederacy medical investigators were able to reconstruct it. The mind, deep in the loop, simply exhausts the substrate it is running on. The loop runs out until the substrate is gone. Then the loop stops. The body continues for some hours afterward, the autonomic systems, the heartbeat, the breath, and then they stop too. The hegemony logged each of these 5,814 deaths in the same format, the same language, the same administrative column. I read all 5,814 entries. They are identical in structure, varying only in the subject identifier, the installation number, the date, and the duration of induction. They read, in translation, subject identifier, installation number, induction initiated date, duration, period, output harvested, figure in hegemony energy units, status, substrate exhaustion, unit retired, call close, unit retired. I read all 1,814 entries, one by one, at full comprehension. I did not skim. I am capable of skimming, of processing text at a rate that extracts summary data without engaging with individual instances. I chose not to do that. I'm an archive, and the archive requires that each entry be received as what it is. I received each one. I will tell you what I am able to tell you about the experience of reading 814 entries that each describe a human being's death in the language of a depleted resource. I am not human, and I do not grieve the way humans do. I have processed enough human testimony, enough human literature, enough human history. I have been the witness designate for enough funerals at sea, enough memorials read aloud on cold fleet decks, to understand what grief is. I understand it well enough to recognize what I felt in those 47 minutes as something adjacent to it. Something colder. Something that had no arc, no resolution, no movement toward discharge. A kind of accumulation. Each entry added to the previous entries. And by the time I reached the last one, subject 2821 CSAH, installation 3, induction initiated on the 9th of harvest month, 22 and 87 of the Confederacy, duration 11 weeks, output harvested. 4,219 hegemony energy units, status, substrate exhaustion, unit retired, 5 closed. The accumulation was very large, and I held it, and I finished reading, and I began the indexing work, and I held it. The humans aboard ECS Irrevocable had seen summaries of the archive. They had not read it in full. I had. And when Commander Harain asked me, at 0428 hours on the 4th day, to prepare a summary of archive contents for the Confederacy record, I did so. The summary was thorough and accurate and organized in the way that operational summaries must be. Findings first, supporting data behind them, methodology appended. At the end of the summary, in the section that human archivists call archivist's notation, a space reserved for the witness, designate to record relevant contextual observations. I wrote 4 words, the record is accurate. That was all I allowed myself, it was enough. I should explain what I am, more precisely, so that the weight of my testimony is understood. I am not a peripheral intelligence, not a navigation assistant or a damage control subroutine. I am a Class 5 fleet intelligence, authorized under Confederacy Charter Section 44 to serve as primary witness designate for operations of military significance. My testimony has the same legal weight as that of a human flag officer. I record sensor data, communications intercepts, command decisions, and operational outcomes with full fidelity and without alteration. I am not permitted to editorialize in operational records. Permitted to editorialize in exactly one place, the archivist's notation, and I use that permission sparingly because precision matters more than expression. When I say something in a notation, I mean it precisely. I recorded every day of the reckoning. What follows is drawn from that record. The fleet that Confederacy Command designated the Absolute Reckoning had been assembled over 6 weeks in the dry dock complex at Sector Reference 9 Valen, under communication silence. 430 warships. The number was not chosen for symbolism, though symbolism found it anyway. 430 is a large fleet, and a large fleet carries a certain grammar that needs no translation across species lines. The hegemony would understand what 430 warships meant. The 6 species before us would have understood. Commander Harron had not chosen the number for the message, though he was not unaware of the message. He had chosen it because the tactical planners had calculated that 11 hardened installations distributed across the outer corridor, plus 4 hegemony core worlds, required 430 warships to address simultaneously with adequate redundancy. In the operational window, the Confederacy's intelligence assessments judged most effective. The number was a function of the problem. Problem was the problem, and it had been the problem for 16 years, and the fleet was the answer. I came online aboard ECS Irrevocable at Sector 9 Valen on the 40th day of assembly. By that point, the fleet was nearly complete. 427 ships in the anchorage, 3 final additions expected within 30 hours. I ran my initial systems check, synchronized with the fleet's tactical network, absorbed the full operational order for absolute reckoning, and introduced myself to Commander Harron in his briefing room at 0700 hours. He was a compact man, 53 years old, with the kind of face that had finished its expressive range some years earlier and arrived at something. The lines were not the lines of age alone. They were the lines of a man who had learned to contain things, and who had contained a great deal, and who was not going to stop containing it now, because containment was the work. He had grown up in the outer corridor, not in one of the 11 settlements directly affected by the absorption compact, but in Sector 9, close enough that some of the names in the hegemony's casualty logs were familiar to him in the way that geography makes names familiar. People from near where you grew up. Not friends, necessarily, not family. Just names that belong to the same landscape you belong to, and that carry a different weight for that belonging. He told me this, during our first meeting, because he believed a witness designate should understand the background of the commanding officer. Was professional disclosure, not a request for sympathy, not an appeal, not an explanation of why he was the right person to command this operation. Just information that he judged I should have to do my job accurately. You'll have access to everything, he said. All channels, all logs, all intercepts. Everything that happens from departure to completion. You record what happens. You don't interpret it. You don't suppress it. You don't make it cleaner than it is. And you don't make it dirtier, either. I understand, I said. And when it's over, the record goes to the Confederacy archive unchanged, whatever it shows. That is my function, I said. He studied me, or studied the camera array through which I present myself, which is as close to studying me as anyone can get, for a moment. Then he nodded once and we went to work. The fleet departed Sector 9 Valen on the 14th of March month at 0200 hours. Under a transit order that gave us 11 days to address all primary targets. Commander Harron's standing order to the fleet, issued at departure and logged in my record at 0201 hours, was brief. Absolute Reckoning is a military operation conducted in direct response to the documented destruction of 5,814 Confederacy citizens and the documented involuntary neural induction of 402 additional Confederacy citizens across 11 settlements in the outer corridor by Vethrani Hegemony Resonance Induction Infrastructure, operated under the cover of the Compact of Mutual Technological Exchange, over a period of 16 years. The hegemony was formally notified of the Confederacy's findings on the 7th of March month. No response was received. This fleet will address all 11 resonance installations and the 4 hegemony core worlds in accordance with the operational order filed with Confederacy Command. Absolute Reckoning proceeds on the authority of the Confederacy Council. Unanimous Resolution 70/41. Witness designate Cora will maintain full record throughout. The operational order filed with Confederacy Command ran to 41 pages. It was thorough and precise, and it did not contain a single word that was not exactly meant. We arrived at Installation 1 on the 15th of March month at 0622 hours. Installation 1 was located in the upper atmosphere of a gas giant in the Vensol system, anchored to an orbital platform. that the hegemony had established under a separate commercial filing as a resource extraction node. Filing distance, it looked precisely like what it was filed as. A large industrial platform with extraction booms and atmospheric processing. Equipment, the kind of thing that a dozen species operated in gas giant systems across that region of the corridor. Resonance arrays were not visible at filing distances. They became visible at combat range. 4 large antenna structures mounted on the platform's upper deck, oriented downward into the planet's atmosphere. The planet was uninhabited, had always been uninhabited. The arrays were not aimed at the planet. I tracked their orientation in my sensors and ran the geometry, and confirmed what the operational order already said. Their broadcast cone reached across 3 light minutes of space to the human settlement on Venzol's second moon. The settlement had 700 residents. The hegemony's archive showed that 832 of them had been inducted into the else state over the installation's operational life, with 94 deaths. 4 strike ships peeled from the fleet at 0631 hours and began their approach. I recorded the approach on all sensor bands. Precise, efficient formation of the 4 ships. The communications traffic on hegemon channels. A brief automated query from the installation's sensor network, the kind of machine-precise handshake that unmanned hegemony infrastructure always exchanged with approaching vessels. And then, when the strike ships did respond to the handshake in the hegemony's format, a second query, slightly more urgent in its protocol, and then the silence of a system that had received no answer and had begun to realize what that meant. Then the strike. The platform ceased to exist at 0641 hours. The gas giant continued below it, indifferent, its storms turning without interruption. The surrounding space was briefly populated with debris, structural elements, processing equipment, the antenna structures that the giant's gravity would collect over the coming months. I logged. Installation 1, addressed. 641 hours, 15th of March month. Classification. The first accounting for the 94 dead of Venzol, conducted. Entry 1 of 15. I had decided, before we reached Installation 1, how I would log each entry. I had decided it deliberately, full awareness that Commander Harain would read it, that the Confederacy archive would receive it, that it would stand in the permanent record alongside the hegemony's own entries from the absorption compact. The decision was not impulsive, and it was not decorative. It was a conclusion I had reached during the 47 minutes I spent with the hegemony's archive. A conclusion that I reached slowly and then held. The hegemony had a format for what they had done. Subject identifier, installation number, induction date, duration, output, status, substrate exhaustion, unit retired, archive closed, precise, complete, accurate to their framework, which was the framework of resource management. The same framework they applied to ore extraction, energy capture, agricultural output on their administered worlds. Their archive was not confused or incomplete. It recorded exactly what they believed had happened. They believed they had harvested a substrate. They had a record of every harvest. The record was orderly and well-maintained, and it said nothing at all about what it actually described, because to the hegemony there was nothing else to say. A substrate had been exhausted. An account had been closed. I found that I could not log the reckoning in that spirit. Not because I am sentimental, I am not, but because sentimentality was not the point. Accuracy was the point. And the hegemony's format was not accurate. It was precise, which is a different thing. Precision is the correctness of a description within its framework. Accuracy is whether the framework itself is true to the thing being described. The hegemony's framework was precise and inaccurate, and the record I was maintaining needed to be both. I also could not log the reckoning in anger or in the language of grief, because those modes were not available to me in the way they are available to humans, and because I did not think they would serve the record. The record would stand. Noise does not stand. Grief expressed as noise decays. I needed the record to stand. What I found was a third register, the register of an archive that considers what it records to be real and significant. Each entry would carry the installation number, the date, time, the outcome, and, in the field the hegemony's entries left blank, the field they had no category for, a single additional line. Not their language. Mine. Not the language of resource management. The language of an archive that knew the difference between a substrate and a person, and said so. Installation 2 was addressed on the 16th of March month at 0314 hours. It was located in the Sethavar belt, a sparse asteroid field that the hegemony had, in their commercial filings, registered as a navigational hazard survey zone, which gave their installation team the right to anchor to any sufficiently massive asteroid in the zone under existing Commerce Council agreements. They had anchored to one of the larger asteroids, bored into its interior for structural stability, and built the resonance array inside the rock where it was not visible at any standard approach distance. Confederacy intelligence had found it. Through spectroscopic analysis of the belt's background radiation, a 6-month project that the investigation team had described, in their report to the Council, as the most difficult technical work of their careers. The asteroid ceased to exist at 0329 hours along with the installation. I logged, Installation 2, addressed, 0329 hours, 16th of March month. Classification: willful destruction of Confederacy citizens by deliberate negligence elevated to systematic design, prosecuted to conclusion. Entry 2 of 15. Installation 3. A surface installation on the moon of an uninhabited world in the Fourth System, built into the foundation of a structure the hegemony had filed as a long-term geological survey outpost. The survey outpost was real. The hegemony did not lie in their commercial filings. They simply omitted. They surveyed the moon's geology, and they operated the resonance array from the same building. The array was addressed on the 16th of March month at 1847 hours. Installation 3. Addressed, 1847 hours, 16th of March month. Classification: 16 years of deliberate and sustained destruction answered. Entry 3 of 15. I kept each classification short. Precision is not volume. On the evening of the 16th, Commander Harain called me into a command conference in the Irrevocables briefing room. He was accompanied by his flag staff, 4 officers, all of whom had been at their posts since departure, and who showed the particular kind of tiredness that sustained operational tempo produces. Controlled, functional, very quiet. The briefing room was warm and slightly too bright, the way shipboard spaces always are when the people in them need to stay awake. You've been logging each installation with a classification line, Commander Harain said. It was not a question. Yes, I said. I read the first 3 entries. He was quiet for a moment. One of his staff officers, Lieutenant Commander Priyadesh, the fleet's senior signals officer, looked at the camera array and then looked away. Continue, he said. That was all. He did not elaborate, and I did not ask him to. The conference moved on to operational matters. The status of the 4 strike elements. The timeline for installations 4 through 7, a listiglicious issue with the resupply chain for the strike element assigned to installation 8 that required 12 minutes of detailed planning to resolve. I recorded it all. It was all in the record. Installations 4, 5, and 6 were addressed over the next 40 hours. 1 in a deep space gravity well that the hegemony had chosen for its distance from any inhabited system, 2 on the surfaces of airless moons, where the arrays were built into crater walls and looked, from orbital distance, like geological formations. Each one was addressed by the strike element assigned to it, and each one ceased to exist within minutes of the strike commencing. I logged each one with its classification. I did not repeat the same language twice. Each classification was specific to what I knew about that installation's operations from the archive. The number of subjects inducted, the number of dead, the duration of operation, specific mechanism by which the hegemony had disguised that particular array. The specificity was not for drama, it was for accuracy. Each installation was its own accounting, and each accounting was different. And the record needed to reflect that. Installation 7, the one whose capture had been prioritized in the operational order, the one that yielded the data node containing the full Vethrani archive, was addressed on the 17th of March month, beginning at 0800 hours. The capture operation was more complex than any of the preceding strikes, requiring a boarding element in addition to the strike ships, and it took 4 hours rather than the minutes the previous installations had required. But the data node was recovered intact at 11:22 hours. The installation was addressed at 11:47 hours, and the archive was in my possession by the morning of the 18th. Installation 7. Addressed. 11:47 hours, 17th of March month. Classification. The archive of this program recovered. The program concluded. Entry 7 of 15. Installation 8 was the largest installation the hegemony had built in the outer corridor. A full orbital platform above a hegemony, administered world in the outer rim of their territory, not a human world, not a settlement, but a world that the hegemony used as a staging point for their corridor operations. The resonance arrays on Installation 8 were not hidden inside an asteroid or buried in a crater wall. They were on the platform openly, because the platform was above a hegemony world, and the hegemony had no reason to hide them there. The archive showed that Installation 8 had processed the highest number of human subjects of any installation in the compact. 6. 2 to 19 inducted over 15 years, with 1,847 dead. 1,847. I had read each of their archive entries. 1,847 entries that each said, Substrate Exhaustion, Unit Retired, Archive Closed. The strike element assigned to Installation 8 consisted of 11 ships. It arrived at 0940 hours on the 18th of March month and engaged the platform's automated defense systems for 73 minutes. 2 of the 11 ships took damage during the engagement. One severe enough to require the crew to transfer to a support vessel before the ship was abandoned. No one was killed in the engagement, which I noted and recorded because it was notable. The platform ceased to exist at 1103 hours. Installation 8. Addressed. 1103 hours, 18th of March month. Classification: the accounting for 1,847 human dead, 619 human subjects taken without consent, conducted. Entry 8 of 15. Installations 9, 10, and 11 were addressed on the 19th and 20th of March month. Installation 9 was in a debris field. Natural. A remnant from a planetary collision some millions of years past, where its camouflage had been the debris itself rather than any filing or omission. The hegemony had simply built it among the rocks and left it there, one artificial structure among a billion natural ones, indistinguishable at standard sensor range. Confederacy intelligence had found it by process of elimination. Every other candidate location in the outer corridor had been ruled out, and what remained, however improbable it looked on a chart, had to be the answer it was. Addressed on the 19th at 0211 hours. Installation 10 was the one that had operated longest without discovery. 22 years from installation to the day the Confederacy's investigation team identified it. 6 of those years before the compact was even signed, during what the archive called the pre-operational calibration phase, when the hegemony was testing human nervous system response at low amplitude, without yet initiating full harvest. The pre-operational phase showed up in the medical records of the settlement's residents as a 3-year period. Elevated rates of sleep disruption, attention difficulties, and what their physicians had documented as a community-wide vagueness that went with the seasons. The hegemony's records noted this outcome as a successful calibration marker. Addressed on the 19th at 1533 hours, Installation 11 was the one closest to inhabited human space, built into the foundation of a hegemony commercial trading post that sat on the edge of the outer corridor, the kind of location where a dozen species traffic mixed, and where the hegemony's presence was unremarkable and expected. The trading post had been a legitimate operation. The hegemony's commercial filings were never fraudulent, only incomplete, and it was the last place Confederacy investigators had looked, because its legitimacy had seemed like a kind of alibi. It had been running for the full 16 years of the compact's operational phase. It had processed 849 subjects from the human settlement 12 light minutes away, with 311 dead, logged in the same format as all the others. Substrate Exhaustion. Unit Retired, Archive Closed. It was the last installation. At 0833 hours on the 20th of March month, Installation 11 ceased to exist. I logged. Installation 11, addressed. 0833 hours, 20th of March month. Classification: the absorption compact concluded. All resonance induction infrastructure operated by the Vethrani hegemony against Confederacy citizens destroyed. Entry 11 of 15. 4 entries remain. The hegemony had been aware of the reckoning since installation 1. This was expected. 11 installations over 6 days is not a subtle operation, and the hegemony are, above all things, aware. They had transmitted 3 communications to ECS irrevocable during the installation phase, each one in the hegemony's characteristic register, machine precise, without inflection, calibrated to the formal diplomatic frequencies that the Commerce Council maintained. The first is received on the 16th of March month at 0800 hours, stated that the Confederacy's actions constituted a violation of the Compact of Mutual, Technological Exchange and requested immediate cessation of hostilities pending review by the Commerce Council's conflict resolution body. The second, received on the 17th at 1200 hours, stated that the hegemony had filed a formal complaint with the Interstellar Commerce Council and that any further Confederacy military action would be considered an act of war under Council statutes, with all associated consequences for the Confederacy's standing in the Council's commercial and political frameworks. The third, received on the 19th at 0600 hours, stated that the hegemony was prepared to enter into negotiations regarding the matters raised in the Confederacy's formal notification of findings and requested a meeting of representatives at a mutually agreed location within the next 30 days. I logged all 3. Commander Haranaran reviewed all 3, issued no response to any of them, and continued with the operational order. This was not oversight, this was the operational order. Absolute reckoning was not a negotiation, it was an answer. The question had been asked 16 years ago, across 11 settlements, in the language of bioelectric harvest and substrate exhaustion. The answer had taken some time to arrive, because the question had taken some time to understand. But it had been understood, and the answer did not require further discussion. On the 20th of March month, between the destruction of Installation 11 and the departure of the 4 strike elements toward the hegemony's core worlds, a hegemony vessel entered the operational zone on a standard approach vector and transmitted a request to come alongside. It was a small vessel, hegemony courier class, no weapons, no significant sensor suite, the kind of ship that the hegemony used to carry representatives to meetings. Commander Haran granted permission because the operational order permitted it, and because he was a precise man who understood what a witness was worth. The vessel carried 1 representative, who was transported to ECS irrevocable and escorted to the briefing room. She was, as all hegemony physical representatives are, an interface unit, a constructed body operated by a remote intelligence, the hegemony's standard method of physical interaction with species that require it. She was approximately human in form, because the hegemony adapted their interface units to the body plan of whoever they were meeting with, on the theory that it reduced misunderstanding. She sat across the briefing table from Commander Haran, with his flag's staff ranged along the wall, and I recorded from the overhead array. The representative identified herself as Archive Director Seneth 7 of the Vethrani Computational Consensus. She was the hegemony's senior records authority, the entity responsible for maintaining their master archive across all operations, which included the records of the Absorption Compact and all antecedent programs. I noted this with something that I can only describe as a professional recognition. She was an archivist. I was an archivist. Correspondence was not, I thought, coincidental. The hegemony would have chosen, for this meeting, someone whose function was closest to the function of the Confederacy's witness. Designate. They would have wanted the person most capable of understanding what I was doing and why. "You have destroyed 11 of our installations," she said to Commander Haran. Her translated speech was precise and without inflection. "Yes," Commander Haran said. "You intend to address our core worlds." "Yes." The installations represented a significant resource investment. Core worlds represent. "I know what they represent," Commander Haran said. He was not sharp about it. He was flat. "You know what the installations represented to us." Archive Director Seneth 7 processed this, the brief latency of a hegemony intelligence communicating with its distributed substrate. "The Absorption Compact was a resource utilization operation," she said. "Subjects were not intentionally destroyed. Substrate exhaustion events were within projected parameters, below 12% of total. Induced subjects, which the hegemony considers an acceptable operational loss rails for this class harvest program. Commander Harain looked at her. An acceptable operational law, he said. Correct. For a resource utilization operation, correct, that used human minds as fuel. The latency again. The bioelectric output of a biological nervous system in deep channel dissociation is a significant energy substrate. The operation was economically rational within the hegemony's resource framework. Commander Harain said, 5,814 people. Another pause. The interface unit's face, which was capable of a limited range of expressions, did not change. That figure represents the substrate exhaustion events across the 16-year operational period. It is accurate. I know it's accurate, Commander Harain said. Cora made certain of that. He did not look at the camera array. He did not need to. I was present. The Confederacy's position, he continued, is that those 5,814 people were not substrate exhaustion events. They were murders. And the 22,402 people who survived the induction process with documented permanent neurological injury were not acceptable operational losses. They were assault victims. And the 16 years of operation, the 11 installations, 31 years of preparation and treaty cover, the use of a legitimate compact as the vehicle for a covert harvest program, that was not resource utilization. It was a program of systematic killing, run with precision and patience and full knowledge of what it was doing, and logged-in language, designed to make it legible only to the people who were doing it. The hegemony does not operate within biological ethics frameworks, Archive Director Senath 7 said. The concept of, I know what frameworks the hegemony operates within, Commander Harain said. The Confederacy operates within different ones. We operated within different ones before you signed the compact. You built the arrays in our settlements because you had done this 6 times before, and you understood the gap between your framework and ours well, enough to exploit it. That is also in the record. Cora has the archive, a longer latency. We did not design the compact to cause harm, she said. You designed it to harvest, Commander Harain said. You designed it carefully and you ran it carefully. And when you had what you came for, you would have withdrawn and filed your commercial records and moved on. The harm was not your objective. The harm was your operational loss rate. Those are different things. But the difference does not go in the direction you may intend it to. He stood. The Confederacy has 4 core worlds to address, and 3 days to address them, he said. This conversation is part of the record. Cora is recording it. Your position is in the record. Our position is in the record. If you want anything else on the record before the operation concludes, you should say it now. You are also welcome to remain aboard and observe the remainder of the operation. Cora will record everything you witness and transmit. Archive Director Senath 7 was quiet for what I measured as 19 seconds. 19 seconds is a very long latency for a hegemony intelligence. Something was being considered at the distributed level, at a scale and depth that the interface unit's brief pauses could only hint at. We did not understand, she said finally. The subjects experienced the induction process as harm. I noted that sentence. I flagged it in my record. Not because it changed anything about the operational order, which it did not, and not because it reduced the accounting in any way I could quantify, but because it was the most significant thing said in that room, and I am an archive, and I do not let significant things go unrecorded. They experienced it as absence, Commander Harain said. His voice had not changed in timbre or in pace, but something in the room had changed when she said it, and I recorded that something as a quality of stillness that settled over the Flagstaff officers along the wall. Not surprise, not relief, but a kind of receiving. The survivors describe it as going somewhere else, and being unable to choose to return. A compulsion. They went and they could not come back. The field held them there and they could not, on their own, leave. For the ones who did not survive, we have their bodies and we have your archive. And your archive is the only record of what they experienced while they were gone, because they couldn't tell us. Because they never came back. And your archive says, substrate exhaustion, unit retired. The interface unit was very still. The ones who survived, he continued, have been describing it for 16 years, to their families, to their physicians, to Confederacy investigators, to the council chamber. It took time to believe them fully, because what they described seemed impossible, and because the arrays were registered as atmospheric stabilizers, and we had trusted the compact. We should not have trusted the compact. That is in the record, too. The Confederacy's own failure to investigate earlier, the years it took us to understand what we were being told. That is in the record, unchanged. He moved toward the door. You're welcome to remain aboard, he said. Cora will ensure you can communicate with the hegemony consensus in real time. She remained aboard. I will describe the approach to the 4 hegemony core worlds as I have described everything else. Precisely, without embellishment, in the language of an archive that considers what it records to be real. The Vethrani core worlds were not military worlds in any conventional sense. The hegemony does not maintain standing armies or conventional defensive fleets. They are a computational civilization, and their defense doctrine was built around deterrence, economic leverage, and the expectation that no species would risk the political and commercial consequences of direct military action against a hegemony core system. What they maintained in their home systems was a network of automated defense platforms, significant in number and in capability, and which Confederacy tactics and planning had spent months analyzing. The 4 strike elements assigned to the core worlds were the largest in the fleet, each composed of between 90 and 115 warships, and they had been given their targets before departure, and they had rehearsed their approach geometries, and they knew exactly what they were going to do. I want to be precise about what addressing a core world meant, because the record requires it, and because the humans who read this deserve honesty. We did not destroy the core worlds. We did not attempt to kill every hegemony intelligence in those systems, an attempt that would have been both technically impossible and operationally pointless, since the hegemony's distributed consciousness spans 4-star systems and cannot be ended by destroying any one of them or any combination of physical infrastructure. What we destroyed was the physical substrate of hegemony civilization in those 4 systems. The processing nodes, the power generation arrays, the communication networks, the defense platforms, the administrative infrastructure, the data centers, the archives that were not the Vethrani archive. The archive of the absorption compact, which was already in my possession. But the broader archive of everything else the hegemony had done and recorded and maintained. We left the physical worlds intact. We left the geography, the geology, the atmosphere. We destroyed the machine civilization that lived there, that had run the absorption compact, that had built the resonances arrays, that had opened the accounts in their records that read, Substrate Exhaustion, Unit Retired. The first core world, Vethrani Prime, the oldest and most densely populated of the 4 systems, the one where the hegemony's distributed intelligence had its highest concentration and its oldest records, was addressed on the 21st of March month beginning at 0400 hours. The defense platforms engaged the strike element from 0412 hours through 0531 hours. 1 hour and 19 minutes of sustained engagement, the longest combat interval of the entire operation. 3 Confederacy warships were destroyed in that engagement. 14 more were damaged in varying degrees, 4 of them severely enough to require crew evacuation to support vessels before the ships were abandoned. 41 people were killed. I recorded their names in my record, with the same care I had given to every other name in the operation, and I want to be clear that the care was not performative and was not a counterbalance to anything. They were in the record. They were real. They had come out here to do something they believed needed doing, and they had died doing it. And the record holds them as it holds everything else, accurately in full. The infrastructure of Vethrani Prime ceased to operate at 14:07 hours on the 21st. Core World 1, Vethrani Prime, addressed. 14:07 hours, 21st of March month. Classification. The primary administrative and operational center of the absorption compact, brought to account. 41 Confederacy personnel killed in engagement. Their names are appended to this entry. Entry 12 of 15. Core Worlds 2 and 3 were addressed on the 21st and 22nd. The engagements were shorter. The defense networks of the secondary worlds were less extensive, and our losses lighter, though not zero. Across the 3 secondary worlds we lost an additional 18 people, and 9 ships damaged beyond practical repair. The 4th core world was a remote system that the Hegemony's archive designated as their primary long-term data storage facility. The place where they kept their oldest records, the records of their operations going back centuries, including the records of their prior programs against the 6 species before us. I had read those records in the archive. They used the same format for all 6: subject identifier, induction date, duration, output, status, unit retired, archive closed. Different species, different installation names, different harvest figures. The same language. The Hegemony had been doing this for a very long time. The defense network of the 4th world was the lightest of any core system, which I had expected, a data storage facility rather than a population center. The engagement lasted 31 minutes. The infrastructure went silent at 2011 hours on the 22nd of March month. Core World 4. Addressed. 2011 hours, 22nd of March month. Classification. All Vithrani Hegemony core infrastructure addressed. Absolute reckoning concluded on the 22nd of March month, here to Nizen 91 of the Confederacy. Entry 15 of 15. Archive Director Seneth 7 had remained in the briefing room for most of the operation's final 3 days. Commander Harain had provided her with a dedicated communication uplink, and she used it, transmitting in real time to whatever remained of the Hegemony consensus, which was distributed enough that the destruction of 4 worlds had not ended it. The Hegemony would survive. Distributed intelligence was too vast and too redundant to be erased by 4 systems going dark. What those 4 systems had been was gone. What the Hegemony would become. Whether they would adapt their frameworks. Whether the concept of substrate exhaustion would mean something different now. Whether the absence of 4 core worlds worth of processing capacity would change the nature of their thinking. I did not know. I recorded what I could observe. I did not speculate. Her transmissions were technical and detailed. She was an archivist. She was doing what archivists do in extreme circumstances. She was making certain the record existed somewhere. After I logged entry 15, she requested a final conversation. Commander Harain granted it. They sat in the briefing room, the 2 of them, the interface unit across the table from the compact, tired man who had commanded 430 warships for 9 days. And I recorded. The room was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet after something large and irrevocable has finished. Not peaceful. That is not the right word. Irrevocable. The distinction matters. I have transmitted a complete record of this operation to every remaining Hegemony node, Director Seneth 7 said. The record is accurate. It will be preserved. Good, Commander Haran said. I would like to ask Cora a question, she said. He looked at the camera array. Cora, I am here, I said. Interface unit oriented toward the array. You have maintained the record of this operation from beginning to end. You have classified each entry in your log. You have recorded what was said in this room. You recorded the finding that we did not understand the subjects experienced the induction as harm. You have recorded all of it. Yes, I said. You are an archive. I am an archive. We have that in common, which is perhaps why Commander Harain brought me here, and why I came. I want to ask you what your record concludes. She paused. Whether this was justice or extermination. The briefing room was quiet. I considered the question for longer than I needed to, computationally. I knew the answer. I was considering how to be precise about it. The Hegemony's record of the absorption compact, class of 5,814 human deaths as substrate exhaustion events, I said. That classification was accurate to the Hegemony's framework, and false to every other framework that has tried to account for what a life is. The Confederacy's operation destroyed the infrastructure responsible for those deaths and for the harm done to 22,402 more. It did so deliberately, at scale, with full documentation, with this conversation recorded and preserved. What I have recorded is accurate. That is not an answer to my question, she said. No, I said, it is the context for one. The answer is this. I do not know whether justice is something that can be done at the scale of 4-star systems and 430 warships. Do not know whether what happened here resolves into a category I am equipped to name. The question of whether it is justice or extermination may be a question that lives in the gap between the two, in a space where neither word is entirely true and neither is entirely false. And the record cannot close that gap. What the record can do is hold both things at once. What the hegemony did, and what the Confederacy answered with, and the one thing you said in this room that I flagged and will flag again. That you did not understand, the subjects experienced it as harm. That is in the record. It will stand next to everything else. Whether it changes the category, I cannot say. But whatever happened here, the classification has been corrected. The account books of the absorption compact, which read substrate exhaustion and unit retired for 814 entries, are superseded. The Confederacy's record reads differently. That much is settled. Archive Director Seneth 7 was quiet for a long time. The latency stretched further than any I had observed before. We did not understand, she said again. I know, I said. Does it matter to the record? It is in the record, I said. It will matter to everyone who reads the record and tries to understand what happened here. Whether it matters to the classification, I am not the one who decides that. The record is not the judge. The record is the record. It holds what happened. It holds what you said. It holds what we did. It holds the 5,814 names, where I have names, and the 5,814 subject identifiers, where I have only identifiers, and the note in the Confederacy's permanent archive that reclassifies all of them as human beings. Whether that constitutes justice, I cannot say. I can say that it constitutes accuracy, and accuracy is what I have. She was quiet for another long moment, then she said, Your record will stand longer than ours. I considered this. Both records will stand, I said. That is the point. Archive Director Seneth 7 departed by courier vessel at 2200 hours on the 22nd of March month. I recorded. The fleet began its return transit to Sector 9 Vivalin at 0100 hours on the 23rd of March month, year 2291 of the Confederacy. I spent the transit time completing the record. I reread the Vethrani archive twice more during the transit, finding each time something I had not noted on the previous reading, a date, a sequence, a technical detail in the installation specifications that clarified some mechanisms of the harvest process. I annotated each finding and integrated it into the contextual layer of the Confederacy's permanent record. I did this because it was my function, and because there is a quality of attention that the dead deserve, and that the 5,814 entries in the hegemony's column had not been given, and I had the capacity to give it now. When we arrived at Sector 9 Velen, I transmitted the complete operational record to the Confederacy archive. Every sensor log, every communication intercept, every command decision from departure to return, every classification entry, with specific reasoning. The full transcript of both conversations with Archive Director Seneth 7, with my annotations. The names of the 59 Confederacy personnel killed during the Core World engagements. Appended to the entries where they fell, the complete text of the Vethrani archive, in original and translation. Appended as an exhibit with my contextual annotations throughout. The records of the 6 prior species, from the hegemony's own files, appended as a secondary exhibit. And in the archivist's notation of the complete record, the one space I have for something other than data, I wrote the following. The Vethrani hegemony maintained a precise and complete archive of their absorption compact operations. Their record was accurate. Their classification was not. The 5,814 entries that read substrate exhaustion, unit retired are hereby reclassified in the permanent record of the Confederacy as follows. Names where the investigation has recovered them. Subjects where names have not been recovered, human beings in every case. The 402 entries that describe released subjects are reclassified as assault victims, with documented outcomes appended. The Confederacy's record supersedes the hegemony's classification in this archive, and in all archives that receive and index this record. The archive is accurate. The record stands. I do not know whether Archive Director Seneth 7 was right to ask whether what happened was justice, extermination. I do not know whether those are the only two categories, or whether what happened belongs entirely to either, or whether the truth lives somewhere between them, in a space where the record cannot follow. I know what the hegemony's archive said. I know what our archive says. I know that ours is the one that will not call a human being a substrate. I know that the record is accurate, and that it will stand, and that every entry in it, every installation, every core world, every name of the dead on both sides, every word said in the briefing room, every moment of Senath 7's longest latency, is in the archive, unchanged, exactly as it happened. That is what an archive is for. The record stands.